Well, I'm with Johnnie Moore. Johnny is an evangelical leader. He's a businessman. He is a commissioner for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. He's the president of the Congress of Christian Leaders. I met Johnnie Moore first at the White House, and I have been impressed with him ever since. Johnny, you play a unique role diplomatically, spiritually, and I want to get your take on what has happened in this past week since the first incursion of terrorists into Israel happened about a week ago. There has been a response that I did not expect. I expected the press to have a response that would be against Hamas and pro-Israel. That's lasted for a minute or two. But there are demonstrations in cities, on college campuses, that are pro-Palestinian, very anti-Israel, very anti-Jewish, some very extremely hateful speech, even advocating for the death of Jewish people. Does that concern you? And why is that happening?
Yeah, it concerns me. And I think people have missed the timeline of exactly what happened here. On Saturday, October 7th, we had the most horrific slaughter of the Jewish community since the Holocaust. And by the way, not just Israelis. Many of these people had dual citizenship. So this affected citizens of at least 43 countries. The hostages are from dozens and dozens of countries. And Israel says that they're going to retaliate, but the protests began before Israel began to retaliate. And so it demonstrates that all over the world is this network of pro-Hamas, pro-Islamist supporters of the terrorist activities of Hamas. And it's not just these sort of outlying groups on the edges of society. You have, as you mentioned, university professors. We had a Cornell University professor whose PhD is from Columbia University, whose father taught at Stanford University, who was standing on a street corner the other day saying that he felt exhilarated by Hamas's terrorist attack against the Jewish people. And so this has ripped the scab off of Islamism, and we're seeing that all around the world, Hamas has real supporters. And when they say things like from the river to the sea, that happened in Dearborn, Michigan, by the way.
Really?
Thousands of people marching down the street saying from the river to the sea. That's a call for the genocide of the Jewish people.
Explain the river to the sea.
Yeah, it's the position of Hamas. It's not the two-state solution. It's the final solution.
Is it from the Euphrates River to the Mediterranean Sea, eradicate the Jewish people from the Middle East? Is that the idea?
It's from the Jordan River to the sea. So the state of Israel, wipe them all out. So Hamas, this is the position of Hamas. Hamas is an anti-Semitic organization that came to kill Jews. We actually now have the instructions that they were carrying with them in the attack. And one of the pieces of instructions says kill as many civilians as possible. They actually had maps to know where the schools were. Somehow, not probably, from Iran, they got the intelligence, most likely, in order to do this attack. But it is a genocidal organization, an anti-Semitic organization that wants to see the elimination of every single Jew on earth. And this is why I am very hesitant to compare anything to the Holocaust. But very, very early on, the Jewish community started using this phrase. This was the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. But there's a difference between the Nazis and between these Hamas terrorists, because the Nazis would sometimes, very often, in fact, they would hide their crimes. And yet Hamas
openly
live streamed their torture of children, and the list goes on and on. I don't know if you want to get into that detail.
Well, I want to drill on something you just said. You mentioned a network of people that were fomenting anti-Israel hatred before Israel declared war. And you talked about a network of people in different countries. Does it then follow that we should be concerned? We have an open border. We have tens of thousands of military-aged adults swarming into this country. We don't even know who they are, where they are. Does that concern you that could be taking place here in this country to a greater extent that we're going to see it in the future?
I'm sorry to say, but yes, yes. The border is a national security issue. In the Department of Homeland Security, they have a phrase called special interest persons. So these are people who cross the border that are from countries that are rife with terrorism. And we've had this incredible, drastic uptick. A few years ago, there was like one or two people. We've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people cross our border. Even in the last week, multiple people from Iran, from Egypt, and from Yemen have been arrested in Texas alone. I was in Brussels speaking at the European Parliament. 6 days later, there was a terrorist attack in Brussels from a Tunisian who was an illegal immigrant into Europe. He pledged his support for ISIS. He killed five people, and so the Iranians, frankly, would be crazy if they weren't exploiting our southern border. We really need to pray. Aside from the fact we need security in this country, we need that border closed. We need to pray for law enforcement that they catch these people, because certainly there are people in our country who crossed our southern border for the purpose of killing Americans. No question.
Johnnie, you mentioned that you were in Brussels, and when you were there, you gave a very impassioned speech to the European Parliament in Brussels. And I heard that speech, and I was impressed with not only the passion that you had, but the facts that you brought to bear on this issue. What did you say to them, and why do you think it was important for them to hear what you had to say?
I went for a lot of reasons. The primary reason why I went is because I was sensing already this sort of both sides mentality that often emerges
moral equivalence,
in Europe, and moral equivalency. Like somehow you can compare the Hamas terrorists with what Israel has to do to defend itself, and you see these things seeping through. And the fact of the matter is that policies in the EU, policies related to the United Nations and our own government have fueled a lot of this. I mean, right now in Germany alone, I read earlier today, there are 450 Hamas operatives in Germany alone. The tunnels that run underneath the Gaza Strip, these tunnels were built. Tunnels I've been in, you've probably been in these tunnels before. They were built with aid provided by the international community to help the Gazans. Hamas took that aid and they built tunnels underneath the ground in order to stage these surprise attacks on Israelis. Just in the last 24 hours, they found rice bags. They say basmati rice on them. And inside of them, it was filled with shell casing. Hamas was using humanitarian assistance to smuggle in weapons and munitions. And these are clear policies. And not only has the European Union and the United States in certain circumstances, and certainly the United Nations, which doesn't even call Hamas a terrorist organization, they've become part of the problem. They have fueled it. There hasn't been a moral clarity. They've been unwilling, some of these leaders, even to call it a terrorist organization. And that's why you're seeing all of these things. And I felt like we had to go to the capitals of the world and we had to say enough is enough. But it doesn't just end with Hamas. It has to go to Hamas's funders, Hamas's supporters. The leader of Hamas planned this attack from a luxury villa in the capital of Qatar, an ally of the United States of America. The Islamic Republic of Iran is funding all of these terrorist groups all over. And that's the other message I sent to the European Union. This isn't just about Hamas. It's as they say in Israel, it's not about the arms of the octopus. You have to get to the head of the octopus, and that's the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Speaking of Europe, multitudes, I was looking at the news in Paris, other capitals, but in Paris in particular, there were hordes of people in the street, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, even though the French government directed them not to do that. And I guess the question is, how frightened do you think the leaders are in these capitals around the world that this thing could get out of hand, that they have now imported so many sympathizers of terrorists into their country that there's no controlling them?
Yeah, they haven't taken the issue seriously. I mean, we've seen that people can be de-radicalized, that Muslim countries in the Gulf are modernizing. You're seeing our Secretary of State visited a place in Abu Dhabi that's sort of a center of Abrahamic religious tolerance in that part of the world. There's a synagogue, a church, and a mosque all in one complex. But in Europe, it seems to be going in the exact opposite direction. And so they're not taking the problem seriously. And in the last 48 hours, 72 hours, you have the Home Minister of the UK saying, if you're a foreigner and you are a Hamas sympathizer, we will deport you. They said the same thing in France. They banned protests, but the genie is sort of out of the bottle. And so we had a French teacher who was killed by a terrorist, just a few days ago, just because they were Jewish. We had the ISIS gunman in Brussels. The French stopped another terrorist attack. In the UK, you had literally people in the street calling for the death of Jews in all of these capitals, in Paris, in Rotterdam, in Brussels, in London. You had people walking through the streets with pictures of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian terrorist that the United States took out a few years ago. It is a hugely, hugely alarming time, and governments have one primary responsibility, and that's to keep their people safe. And they're failing at that. They're failing at all of it. And in a moment like this, in a terrorist attack, that if it would have happened in the United States of America, okay, what happened in Israel, it would be the equivalent of 40 to 50,000 Americans dying in a single city on a single day, and another 20,000 being taken hostage. That's what's happened. That's what happened in Israel, except it wasn't like an atom bomb exploded. They used ISIS-like tactics. They went village to village and house to house, and they did all those horrific things to the most vulnerable people. And yet, it seems like our governments around the world haven't come to their senses. And these protesters, this is not about Palestinians and Israelis. This is about Israel and Hamas, a terrorist organization. And if people are in the streets cheering what Hamas did to the Jewish community, that is a national security issue. Yeah. And our governments need to be paying attention to it.
It seems that this attack by Hamas was intended to undermine an agreement that Israel and Saudi Arabia was inching closer towards, a peace agreement. Now, you and I have been in some strategic meetings in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, with Joel Rosenberg, Michelle Bachmann, a group of evangelical representatives. So we sat right across from the Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and they've been moving toward peace with the Abraham Accords. Do you think now that hope is shattered?
I think the exact opposite. I think these proud Arab leaders, the last thing they're going to do is let the Islamic Republic of Iran and some terrorists that want to take them out to squander the future prosperity of the region. And so I think we're going through a moment now where everyone is saying a bit of what they have to say. They're taking the temperature in the street, as they like to say it. But at its heart, things haven't fundamentally changed, because the Hamas terrorists want to take out all of those other leaders. And 1 week before this happened, Hamas issued a statement threatening to do this if Saudi made peace with Israel. 1 week before this, in the capital of Iran, in Tehran, they had this big, huge military parade where the leaders boasted about basically what we've seen happen in the last couple of days, including the Ayatollah himself. And so I think these terrorists, in this horrific act of just incomprehensible horror, have had the exact opposite effect. They've united Israel. They've fortified America's relationship with Israel. They've changed what was, and time will come to critique these things. The U.S. policy on Iran played a huge part in what happened here. We've just a few years ago, Iran had about $6 billion of foreign cash reserves. Iran now has over $75 billion of foreign cash reserves. In 2021, Iran maximum was selling 400,000 barrels of oil a day. Today, Iran is selling 3 million barrels of oil a day, most of that going to China into Russia. Iranian weapons are being used all over the world. And so a time will come to say, like, this is also a failure of American policy in a huge way that's made all of us less safe. This is not an administration which embraces the peace through strength mentality. But you know what suddenly happened? A change in U.S. policy. We have 2 carrier strike groups sitting in the Mediterranean Sea. We have a total shift in U.S. policy. And so what Hamas terrorists did in an attempt to undermine peace in the region, and we're not through it yet, and we have to pray every single day, because if rockets start coming from the north and Lebanon into Israel, it's a whole different ballgame. But what they actually ended up doing is uniting the world yet again against terrorism. But words are not enough. We need action from our leaders.
Speaking of Hamas, they have a charter. People can go and read what they believe, what they stand for, what they hate. The charter of Hamas and the nation of Iran under the Ayatollahs, they want the total elimination of the state of Israel. America is the great Satan. Israel is the little Satan. It seems to me that at least part of the shock of all this, what has happened the last week, is that the world hasn't taken those threats seriously. They're just like waking up to the fact that they've threatened this. Why should we take what they threatened seriously, and why hasn't it been taken seriously up to this point?
Look, I argue with people in the government about this all the time. Many people think that Iran and the Ayatollahs use religion as sort of a weapon. I think they're actually believers. I think the Ayatollah could wake up from a dream in the middle of the night, and if he had a nuclear bomb, he would send it. Okay, this is evil. What the Hamas leaders have said is evil. You can just go listen to it online. What Hamas is doing now is evil. They're taking the Palestinians and using them as human shields. I mean, this is, and by the way, a lot of people in the media are taking it the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And all of a sudden, Israel is having to answer all of these questions. For what is Israel supposed to do? Right. Right now, rockets are still flying from Gaza into the state of Israel, and everyone wants to talk about proportionality and all of these things. It is absolutely absurd, the way Israel is treated versus these terrorists. But when crazy evil people say crazy evil things, you have to take them seriously. And the Islamic Republic of Iran not only wants to destroy Israel, they want to destroy the United States. And right now, on European soil and on U.S. soil, they are actively trying to assassinate our leaders. The former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is the only former Secretary of State to have a Secret Service detail every single day of his life since he was Secretary of State, because the Iranians are actively trying to kill him. We have to take this seriously. So you have to do everything. You've got to sanction them. You've got to cut off the oil supply. You've got to restore deterrence. You've got to make sure that they know that the United States of America believes its power is a responsibility in the world. And that doesn't mean that we go export, that we're the world's policeman, as they say. But when it comes to our values, and when it comes to our most important ally in the world, the state of Israel, and especially as Christians, but by the way, it's also the case for Muslims. These ISIS Hamas terrorists, they didn't just kill Jews. They killed 50 Bedouins. They killed a Muslim paramedic who drove his ambulance when he heard that these people were being killed at the music festival. He was saving lives. And these Hamas terrorists killed the Muslim ambulance driver and stole his ambulance. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a level of evil that a lot of people in politics, they don't believe in evil. They just think that, people have different points of view in the world. In fact, a very senior U.S. government person that's now been suspended from his job, he said that Hamas just views things differently. Yeah. No, there's good and there's evil.
Johnnie, in this war, in this response by Israel, they are warning the population of Gaza, get out, flee south. We'll give you safe corridors and able to do that. Hamas has been blocking some of those corridors to not let people. They would rather see people in their own city killed so they can have footage to show the world of the atrocities of Israel. So here is Israel trying to do everything they can to get people before they target Hamas leadership. What do you think now? Here we have the president going to Israel to meet there. What do you think the next move of the Israelis is going to be?
Israel's not going to stop until they totally destroy Hamas entirely, and the United States should not tell them to stop, and the European Union should not tell them to stop. I was in a conversation the other day with a woman who was speaking to us on Zoom from her bomb shelter in the north of Israel, and she said, "In the past, what has happened with this terrorist organization when they send their thousands of rockets is the international community demands that we stop." And then she said, "They ask us to stop so that they can kill us again. And this time, we're not stopping."
Johnny, you wrote a book and you came out to our church and even talked about it. You updated Fox's Book of Martyrs. And you talked in your book about, what has been going on in terms of Christian persecution since Fox wrote his book up till modern times. You did such a great job in that. Where I'm going with this is, are there believers, are there missionaries in Gaza? Has the Lord been using people to reach that people group?
Yeah, there are. And just like there are in Iran, we have people everywhere. And that's the hardest part in many ways about all of this, because, our and if Christian history is any prediction of the future, we will have incredible stories of these moments of believers who sacrificed their lives to save others, and maybe even people who find Jesus through all of it. I always say the best evangelist in the entire Muslim world is the Ayatollah in Iran, because he so defamed his religion and his culture that millions and millions and millions of Muslims went looking for something else. And this is why in Iran we have the fastest growing evangelical movement in the entire Muslim world. So yes, God is at work, and yet I think sometimes we face this challenge, like as Christians, what do we pray for? And I always go back to two things. The Apostle Paul said, "Pray that we would be delivered from wicked and from evil people." And Hamas persecuted the Christian community as soon as they took over the Gazan Strip. Very, very, very small Christian community left there, and right now they're huddled up in churches. So God expects us to recognize that He works through persecution, but we're supposed to pray for these people to be saved from evil, including the evil of terrorism. And then there's an Old Testament juxtaposition where the Bible says, the book of Psalms says that we're to seek peace and pursue it. And then it says, justice we shall pursue. And this is the juxtaposition. God hates what these Hamas terrorists did to people made in His image. And God loves peace. And my prayer is that He can work in strange and mysterious ways. And if any of these people have radical life transformations through the power of the Lord Jesus Christ, more power to them. I pray for that every single day. I've seen that throughout the Muslim world. However, the evil needs to be eradicated, and we need to see peace across that region. And my prediction is that one day I'm going to be sitting in my house. I'm going to be an old man with my grandkids, and they're going to ask me about this moment of history. I read about it in a school book or something. And I'm going to be proud of one thing, because if they ask me, what did I do when the Jewish community faced the worst attack since the Holocaust, and this evil rose up again to kill us and them, Christians too, the leaders of Hamas, they say that openly. They want to eliminate all Christians and all Jews. I'm going to be able to look at my grandkids, and I'm going to be able to say, I spoke up for the Jewish community. I went all the way to Europe. I tried to rescue people. I raised money. I did all of these things. I did everything I could to help them. But I believe that by that time, we'll have a peaceful a peaceful region where if God is, if it's God's will, that entire part of the world will be a part of the world where we will look back at this horrible moment as the last gasp of these evil terrorists. And if that happens, it will partly happen because the United States of America is still just solidly enough on its Judeo-Christian foundation that even in moments like these, we can find our moral compass, even if it's very, very hard to locate.
Wow, good word, Johnny. I appreciate that. Hey, one final question. If you were to explain to someone the roots, the origin of anti-Semitism, where does it come from? Why does it exist? How would you frame that theologically?
I call it the oldest hate. It goes back to the Pharaoh of Egypt wanting to take out the Jewish community. It goes to Esther standing in front of the king on the edge of a genocide of the Jewish people. The enemy of God, Satan himself, loves nothing more than to see the death of God's people. And there is this irrational, ungodly, satanic hate of Jewish people. And it emerges all across this political spectrum. It comes from everywhere. But the one thing we must do as Christians is we must speak out against it, wherever it pops up, however it pops up. First of all, because it's wrong. Second of all, because as Christians, our Savior, Jesus, he was Jewish. Okay? What we call the Old Testament is the Hebrew Bible. Okay? It's the Hebrew Bible. We worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay? This is, we're cousins. Okay? This is one family. And we should speak up against hate of all kinds everywhere, because every human being is made in the image of God. And we're to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. But we should be the first in line to speak up against anti-Semitism. And for one final reason too, Skip, and this is strange to us, because we're from a stream of what they call evangelical Christianity. Okay, so evangelicals are this, we're the most pro-Jewish Christian movement in history. I think it's part of the revival. There's 800 million of us all around the world. I think it's part of it is that we have always been a Zionist form of Christianity. And so sometimes we miss the fact that for many, many centuries, the anti-Semitism in the world, it didn't come from Muslims. It didn't come from secular society. It came from Christians. Christians who said, that it was the Jews that killed Jesus. It was Roman soldiers that nailed Jesus to the cross. It was Christians who committed their own pogroms at certain points of history. It was Christians who kicked all the Jews out of the United Kingdom. It was Christians who kicked all the Jews out of Spain. And when Theodor Herzl, the founder of the modern state of Israel, or the Zionist movement rather, when he had his first Zionist Congress in Switzerland, in Basel, Switzerland, it was all Jews except for 4 or 5 Christians that were friends of his. And he brought those Christians. He called them Christian Zionists. And so the story of the modern state of Israel has as much to do with Christian Zionism as it does with Jewish Zionism. And it's easy for us to take for granted that for many, many centuries, the worst anti-Semites were Christians. So it's a new thing for the Jewish and Christian community to be so close. And you shouldn't judge your Jewish neighbors when they're a little nervous about the love that we have for them.
Right. That's well said, Johnny. Thank you. So many important reminders. Thank you for joining us today. God bless you.